Deleted session, December 10, 1980. Now, some remarks generally having to do with the kinds of villages in Italy that so took your interest. There were many such villages in the mountains in the overall times of living and your Roman soldier, and they were much in character, like the villages recently destroyed in the earthquake. They dealt with a different framework of consciousness, one that is somewhat now out of character with your kind. I mentioned that modern psychology actually short-changed you, trying to fit itself into Darwinian beliefs. Those Italian villages exemplified really a kind of consciousness, or an orientation of consciousness, that existed before modern psychology and Darwinian belief, a framework of consciousness and experience that was overall similar in the recent past and in the time of romance. One, in other words, that existed up into the present. It is not just that the people related more to the land, though they did, but that they had a different kind of psychological extension, not only with nature, but in and with time itself. If they were isolated in spatial terms, they extended their imaginations and to some extent their lives and emotions both backward into the past and ahead into the future in ways that modern psychology has made most difficult. Even though those village people lived in your era, however, they were largely untouched by modern technology, and so kept to their own ways. They and the land seemed one, sharing the present seasons, the daily work, but more than that, their fathers and their forefathers, and usually many past generations of given families came from the same area. People lived in houses shared by their elders that had earlier been shared by their elders backward through family lines, so that daily experience and family incident was not nearly as restrained to the present in your terms. Ancestors had walked the same fields, walked the same paths, and to that extent, the path was open-ended rather than closed. The people believed that those ancestors still existed in the Christian heaven, or earlier in the Roman equivalent, and also they believed that such a dimension awaited them to give them a further extension of existence after their own deaths. This provided them with a different kind of time framework psychologically, one that any peasant could relate to. The ordinary person, for example, in the Western world cannot relate to a Darwinian past in that same fashion, and psychology robs him of any personal extension in the future after death. So, in practical life, most modern people have freedom of extension in space, but less in time. The peasants, of course, worked close with the land and the seasons, with Earth's natural timing, and even though such work seemed to make time go faster, in the overall, the sense of present time includes a rich dimension from both present and past, so that in your terms it would seem longer by contrast, richer when people went to bed earlier, lacking the night's electricity. These were unlettered people, in a fashion. In this dated disaster, they took their land with them in their deaths. The land that is the environment, and the consciousness in your terms of the people were part of each other in such a strong fashion that their energies merged to bring about the earthquake conditions. You had a mass burial, land and people together, a folding in of consciousness upon itself, of energies upon energies. As those people realized that their kind of existence could no longer be maintained, those who survived react in the old fashion, waiting to build again, refusing better shelter. But the times had indeed changed. The balances of nature, culture, communication, transportation had altered to such a degree that a real poverty had resulted. Not simply simple basic, but adequate living conditions. The people compared themselves to the rest of the world at times, and many of the young were beginning to live. But those villages were again very like those in the times of Libyan and the Roman soldier. They had been plundered at times by wandering Roman soldiers of Rome's empire. Some of the soldiers themselves had been recruited from such areas, leaving their families behind, and the old men to do the work. They were not in a way quite as isolated then, however, for horses and cars and so forth could travel on mountain passes and were abundant in the entire area. While today, for example, the roads are poor and sometimes not passable for automobiles. The towns represent to you that different kind of orientation, however. It was one that Libyan knew of and respected, where the Roman soldier scoffed at what even then he considered the old ways. A lifetime of whatever length seemed no longer than it does now, for it was psychologically lengthened by that rich extension into both the future and the past. People just before the earthquake even related imaginatively not only to their own ancestors, but to their children's children after their own death, as those children lived their lives in the same locations, in the same land area. The entire structure was beginning to topple, however, and the poverty was overtaking the dead. There are many reasons, but mainly the relationship between the village people and the rest of the world had stretched too far. The Roman soldier had been in several skirmishes in such a village, stealing livestock for his companions. Libyan had hidden out in one such village from the Romans. The former protected him. So, there are different emotional connections along those lines. It goes without saying that such people were not innovators. They had little use for book learning. People who were unusually intelligent were suspect and did not fit in. They were usually thought to live one way or another, sometimes simply because they felt so isolated in their own surroundings. Change was frowned upon. In the old days, they paid what tribute they had to the government, but otherwise kept to their own ways, and the same applies to the villages that were destroyed. I do not want you to think that I am idealizing them, for their ways were not particularly gentle, but their experience with time was a rich vein of experience that is now most unusual, one that you were at least aware of in your own reincarnational episodes. You feel now, by contrast, that you must get all of your living in between birth and death, that you must hurry to get everything done, so that time itself is indeed shortened. Your life seems to have no past behind it or future ahead of it, so identity itself seems foreshortened. Now that particular feeling is relatively new in history as you understand it, for almost all cultures in the past have had their built-in extensions of identity that included a dimension of actuality of one kind or another, from which each individual emerged, and to which you would return. Such a framework may have been filled with potential problems, but there were usually ways in life to get around those ways that were specified according to religion or culture. Hellfire, for example, hardly presents any desirable extension, but there was before hell always the hope that the sinner would repent, and even if hell became the feared future existence, it still preserved the nature of the human consciousness involved. Psychology and evolution thematically simply cut off man's existence with death. Living had a scholar's distaste for the peasants, but he also possessed a solid respect for the overall framework of their existence. He had a tendency, on the one hand, to idealize them for their love of nature, and on the other hand, he somewhat scorned their lack of intellectual breadth. The Roman soldier understood them far better, for he was originally of their stock. I mention these ideas of time also now because they fit in so well with your joint personal preoccupation with time, how to use it, and so forth. Living could also give you more on such issues if you ever find the time. Do you have a question? Ralph said. I reread some of those sessions from 1973. They said, you can both put them to use now, as you did then. Do not think of them as information in the past that in all of this time you should have used better, for time as you see does not behave in that fashion. They are rhythms in your experience, so that some information comes freshly newly in life in your experience that in certain ways you overlooked before. But in all of this, you must understand that whatever course you took in the meantime was in its way a proper course, not say a wrong one. This difference in attitude is highly important. In the overall structure, all seeming errors are indeed redeemed, forming syntheses of creativity of their own kind, leading to understands and future developments that, say, outshine whatever problems you might have encountered. You will both benefit, however, by reading and then discussing together those sessions. Now I bid you a fond good evening. Ralph said good night, says.